Hey there history buffs, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Hannah, and today we're diving into one of the rarest and most dramatic scenarios in royal history. The years when England/Great Britain had 3 monarchs in just 1 year. Having 2 monarchs in 1 year is fairly common. It happens when a monarch dies, is usurped, or abdicates. But 3? That's rare and unprecedented, and that's exactly why we're going to look at the occasions when it did happen and why. But before we start, if you're new here, hello and welcome. If you enjoy my content, please do make sure to like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into the video. When we think of the phrase, the year of 3 monarchs, our minds often go to turbulent succession crisis or brief reigns, like the examples we've had so far. But 1688 is a different kind of anomaly. But 1688 is a different type of fish. Kessler fish, pot of fish, there we go. Not a story of swift deaths and desperate claimants, but of revolution, exile, and a monarchy turned upside down. Technically, this wasn't a year of 3 reigns, but it is still of 3 monarchs. And while 2 of them, William and Mary, ruled together, their ascent marked one of the most profound turning points in British history. So while William and Mary may technically be an honourable mention on this list, their story is still worth telling. And they still count. It's still 3 monarchs. So let's start with the monarch who lost his throne, King James II. He became king in 1685 and was born in 1633. He was the second surviving son of King Charles I and the younger brother of King Charles II. James was a Catholic, an identity that made him deeply unpopular in a nation that had become firmly Protestant. Yet for the first years of his reign, the country tolerated him, in part out of loyalty to the monarchy, and in part because he had no male heir. His Protestant daughter, Mary, was next in line. But in June 1688, everything changed. James's second wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son, James Francis Edward. And suddenly, England faced the prospect of a Catholic dynasty. For many, this was unacceptable. You only got to think back to the last time they had a Catholic monarch, and that was Mary. You know, Bloody Mary. 7 Protestant nobles, known as the Immortal Seven, secretly reached out to Mary's husband, William of Orange, a Protestant prince of the Netherlands, and invited him to intervene. William was no stranger to English politics. Born in 1650, he was not only King James II's son-in-law, but also his nephew. The product of generations of, shall we say, tangled Stuart lineage. His marriage to Mary was strategic and fraught, but politically essential. He was a seasoned military commander and a staunch opponent of King Louis XIV of France, and he saw England's instability as both a threat and an opportunity. On the 5th of November 1688, William landed on English soil with a fleet and a Dutch army. As he marched inland, support for James evaporated. Protestant nobles defected. Even James's own daughter, Anne, later Queen Anne, abandoned him. By December, James had fled to France. Parliament, viewing his flight as abdication, declared the throne vacant. Now came the question of succession. Mary was next in line. Many argue she should reign alone. After all, she was the rightful heir. But William refused to accept a subordinate role, and Mary, ever deferential to her husband and a reluctant ruler by nature, refused to rule without him. So, in a constitutional first and so far last, William and Mary were offered the crown jointly. On the 13th of February 1689, they were proclaimed co-monarchs of England, Scotland and Ireland. Their coronation followed in April. But while they ruled together in name, in practice it was William who held the reins of power. Parliament granted him the sole and full exercise of regal power during their joint reign. Mary II, born in 1662, was just 26 when she became queen. She had been raised a Protestant despite her father's Catholicism and was deeply committed to her faith. Though she would prove capable when William was away on campaign, she often played a secondary role in the eyes of contemporaries, and by her own choice. William, by contrast, was a hardened statesman. His rule marked a firm rejection of Catholic monarchy and an embrace of Protestant Europe. His reign wasn't just symbolic, he brought England into the broader European power struggle, most notably against France. He was in many ways England's first modern king. Their reign ushered in a new era. Parliament passed the Declaration of Right, later known as the Bill of Rights, in December 1689, a cornerstone of Britain's constitutional monarchy. It limited royal power, prohibited Catholic succession, and established parliamentary supremacy. Never again would the crown wield the same unchecked authority as the Stuarts before them, and Tudors and Plantagenets and the rest of them. The events of 1688 became known as the Glorious Revolution. Glorious because it was supposedly bloodless. It wasn't, but because it avoided a civil war and because it remade the monarchy without destroying it. So while William and Mary's joint rule officially began in 1689, the revolution that put them on the throne happened in 1688, the year England had, in effect, 3 monarchs: James II, the deposed king in exile, and William III and Mary II, the constitutional pioneers who reshaped the monarchy forever. The last and most recent year on this list is 1936. King George V has reigned for over 25 years, a steadying presence through World War I, political reform, and social upheaval. Born in 1865, the second son of Edward VII, he was never expected to be king, but the early death of his older brother put him on the path to the throne in 1910. Under George V, the monarchy modernised. The royal family's German name was dropped during the war, replaced with Windsor, and the monarchy began to engage more with ordinary citizens. He was widely respected for his sense of duty, though behind the scenes he was conservative, stern, and cautious about change. But by the mid-1930s, George's health was deteriorating. A lifelong heavy smoker, he suffered from chronic bronchitis and heart problems. On the 20th of January 1936, he died at Sandringham House. Within hours, his eldest son was proclaimed king, and so began the brief, controversial reign of King Edward VIII. Born in 1894, Edward was charming, athletic, and immensely popular. As Prince of Wales, he toured the empire and was seen as a symbol of youthful modernity. But beneath the public image was a man increasingly disenchanted with royal life, impulsive, restless, and privately determined to live on his own terms. Almost immediately, Edward began breaking with royal tradition. He insisted on attending his own proclamation, a constitutional no-no. He ignored ministerial advice, showed disdain for official paperwork, and raised eyebrows by publicly speaking on political issues, and also Nazis. But it was his private life that would trigger a constitutional crisis. Edward had fallen in love with Wallis Simpson, an American socialite and divorcee, and by the time he took the throne, she was still married, to her second husband, and already pursuing a second divorce. This presented a problem. As king, Edward was supreme governor of the Church of England, which at the time forbade the remarriage of divorced persons if their ex-spouses were still alive. Marrying Wallis would defy both church doctrine and the moral standards expected of the crown. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin gave Edward 3 options. You abandon the relationship, you marry against the government's advice and cause a constitutional crisis, or you abdicate. Edward chose the third. On the 10th of December 1936, in the presence of his 3 brothers, he signs the instrument of abdication. The next evening, in a calm, carefully measured BBC radio address, he told the world, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." I hope you enjoyed my personation. With those words, Edward VIII became the only monarch in British history to voluntarily give up the throne. The very next day, his younger brother, Prince Albert, Duke of York, became King George VI. Albert, or Bertie, was never meant to be king. He was quiet, reserved, and plagued by a lifelong stammer. He had always lived in Edward's shadow, but in the wake of the abdication, the crown needed stability, and Bertie, reluctant though he was, stepped up. Born in 1895, just 18 months after Edward, George VI faced enormous pressure from the outset. He had to restore public confidence in the monarchy while leading Britain through the storm clouds of war. But with the support of his wife, Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, and his eldest daughter, Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II, he rose to the occasion. His reign would be defined by duty, dignity, and endurance, leading the nation through World War II and beginning the transition from empire to Commonwealth. The events of 1936 reshaped the monarchy forever. Edward VIII's abdication wasn't just a scandal, it was a test of Britain's unwritten constitution. For the first time, it became clear that a monarch could not simply be a king by right of birth. He had to act in accordance with the government, with Parliament, and with the people's expectations. This crisis changed the royal succession. Had Edward not abdicated, there would not have been Queen Elizabeth II, and the entire Windsor dynasty would look very different today. So that's all of the years where we've had 3 monarchs in 1 year. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.